what is a measure? A measure in Power BI means that you can use measures to enable creating advanced solutions and models in Power BI for the use of enhanced data analysis and your reporting, right? That's what the measures are for. Why do you use a measure? But what is a measure? A measure is a calculation that uses DAX expressions. DAX is a Power BI thing and stands for data analysis expressions. So it uses those DAX expressions to calculate values based on data in the tables in your model. So I'm going to have an example here to show you what we mean with that. Measures are also called calculated measures because they perform real-time calculations based on the interactions that you or the end user will do with the report, or when you're changing the report, or anything like that. This is how a DAX expression, a measure, would look like. DAX is a library of functions for building formulas in Power BI. This is how it's constructed. So it starts with the measure, how you want to call your measure, right? So in this case, I created a measure for calculating the average unit price of the unit price in the item ledger entries, which is, by the way, already a calculated field. So I can use measures inside other measures. I'm using the function average in my DAX expression. Sorry, I skipped the equal sign, but obviously that's just the operator. Then I'm using average. That's one of the examples, right? One of the other ones would be like if you do calculations, you can divide or multiply, or when you're talking about text columns, you can concatenate is a DAX function, or for financial numbers, for instance, there is a year-to-date or month-to-date expressions you can use as well. And then the next two sections of your expressions are between the parentheses. You need to put in the table that we're using. So in this case, I'm using the item ledger entries table, and the field that we're using, unit price in this case, again, which is already a calculated field. So it's either a regular field that's directly in the item ledger entries table, or one that you calculate. If you want to know more, the slide will have a link to the Microsoft documentation on all the other functions that you can use in DAX. So how does it look in Power BI, right? Oh, sorry. So let's go to Power BI and let's show you how you can put together a measure. Because if you don't remember, the syntax of how that measure needs to look like, there's an option for what we call a quick measure. And if you're using a quick measure, you don't have to know exactly how that's how to construct what the syntax of that measure should be. So let's say, for example, here, because I got my this is the customer ledger entry table, and I want to calculate. Let me show you real quick. I want to calculate for each customer ledger entry not only what the amount was, like the invoiced amount. I want to know per entry what the commission was that we now going to pay to that salesperson based on this invoice. But it's that commission is not stored in the customer ledger entry, so I have to pull together the commission that is set up in the salesperson table and multiply that with the sales amount on my customer ledger entry. So again, you use quick measures. Then you'll select your function. So here is all the functions when I just talked about year to date, month to date, and here in the bottom are your calculations. So in this case, I'm doing a multiplication. And which two fields am I gonna multiply? You click on this add data. I'm selecting my amount from the customer ledger entry, and I'm multiplying that, looking for that salespeople, commission percentage, and multiplying these two. Now, if I hit add, it's gonna put these things together, and it's creating that DAX statement for me automatically. So I don't have to do that. The name that it has generated is something I want to change because it automatically generated the name based on the fields that I selected. So I want to rename that new field to say, for instance, this is my document commission amount or something like that, right? So now I have that here. I can add that field to my report. So if I go click in my report here and say I want to add that field document. So now I lost, where is my, here it is. So I'm going to add that to my report, but as you can see, it's not doing exactly what I want, right? So 3% of this amount is not $500, right? So I need to click on that exact column again, because I need to do an extra calculation. I need to divide this percentage by 100, and now you can see that it automatically updated this this amount based on the calculation that we put in here. So that is how you can quickly put together a using the quick measure, putting together a measure. The last topic I wanted to touch upon is calculated columns. So I've done a predefined calculated column unit price. So an example of that would be, again, your item ledger entries. In your item ledger entries, the fields that are stored in Business Central, you'll have a quantity here and you have a sales amount. This is the total sales amount. If you want to know what the unit price was that was used for that sales amount, you'll have to calculate that. And that's what you can do with a calculated column. So I'm dividing that sales amount by the quantity so that I can come to my unit price, right? So if I click on the unit price here in my table, you'll see that this is my, I'm using the same DAX kind of statement, syntax format. This is the new field name that I have set up. I'm using divide as my function. I'm dividing my sales amount by my quantity. And I'm adding here a little nuance. I'm adding the minus sign because you know that quantities in item ledger entries are stored as a minus when it's sales, and I don't want a negative unit price. So add that negative to do that in there. Now, the difference between my measure is now with the calculated column, if you click on the data view here, and you look at the item ledger entries table, so back here and selecting my item ledger entries, you will notice that at the very end of the table, it has now added that new table that I just added as a calculated table, which will allow me to do something additional, which I'll come back to in a minute here. So that's the difference between a measure and a calculated column. It's adding this into the table. Now, what are the pros and cons with measures versus using calculated columns? Measures are calculated on the fly, whereas pre-calculated are calculated when you refresh your data. By the way, also notice the emojis, I would say, the icons that are used in Business Central. This is where you see this stands for a measure, this stands for a calculated column. Another big difference is that the calculated columns are stored in your RAM memory, whereas measures are not. They're calculated on the fly. So if you have, especially if your data sets get large, make sure that you're using calculated columns only if really needed, because the bigger your data gets, the more RAM it's gonna take. If you want to do a calculation across tables like I did with the commissions on the salesperson table and calculate that with another table, you have to use measures because the calculated columns can only do calculations within the same table. So all of that so far points towards measures, right? Here, this last one is one where you need to consider calculated columns, is when you want to use a calculated column in a relationship. When you concatenate, for instance, text columns, and you want to do a lookup based on the concatenated column, you'll have to set that up as a calculated versus a measure, because you cannot do that with a measure. One more minute for best mistakes and best practices. So again, I think I made that clear. Overusing your calculated columns is not a good idea. Use measures whenever you can. Make sure your relationships are accurate and that you set all of them up. Also make sure that you only use columns and data in your data set that you need to support your model or report. There's a lot of fields that I see sometimes in Power BI reports that are coming and that are synced with Business Central, and people are not using them in the report. So make sure you leave those out. Also understand your the business requirements and the relationship with the tables. Document your model when you're done. When you ever need to go back to it, it really helps if you document it while you're setting it up, and limit the number of columns.